Karla Anderson stood beneath the shimmering lights of a charity ball held at one of New York's most prestigious hotels, feeling truly free for the first time. The atmosphere was like something out of a fairy tale. Guests sparkled in elegant attire, and the music seemed to dance through the air. That night, she longed to experience something different. She wanted to escape the monotony of her life, to break free from the ordinary, if only for a while. Perhaps she'd find something to make the night uniquely hers. As her eyes wandered across the vast ballroom, something suddenly caught her attention. A masked man in a dark tuxedo moved gracefully through the crowd. His eyes glittered almost magically from behind the mask. She didn't know who he was, but there was something about him that sent a flutter through her instantly. This man felt different from every other man she'd ever known. He sensed her gaze. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Karla felt as though she'd detached from the world. Her heart raced while his silent, magnetic aura captivated her. She wondered who lay behind the mask. The man approached slowly, offering her a faint smile. "Would you like to dance?" he asked, his voice low and resonant. Karla's heart pounded as she nodded. "Of course, but could I know who you are?" she couldn't help but ask. He paused for a moment, a strange glimmer flashing in his eyes. "You don't know me," he said. "But you will soon." His words, laced with a hint of promise, etched themselves into Karla's mind. With thoughts trailing after his name, they began to dance. She pondered who this man behind the mask could be, but there was something about that night that made her want to belong only to him. Time seemed to stand still. Their steps flowed in perfect harmony with the rhythm of the dance. In that moment, it was just the two of them in the world. As the night wore on, the man nearly hypnotized Karla. Words weren't necessary as they danced together, just the synchrony of their movements and the comforting silence he exuded. But time at some point sped by. When the dance ended, he bowed slightly to her. "See you again," he said, then vanished swiftly into the crowd. Karla stood in the middle of the ballroom, reeling from the impact of this man whose name she didn't even know, her head spinning for a while. The next morning was Karla's first day at her new job. Her eyes gazed out through the windows of her office in the early morning light. This was a moment she'd been anticipating for a long time. She had plenty to do in her new role, but the masked man from the ballroom lingered in her mind. His presence had left such a strong impression that she spent the day trying to fill the emptiness inside her with thoughts of him. A few hours later, she took her place in the meeting room. As the last to arrive, she tried to focus on her tasks without drawing attention. Then the door opened, and there he was, the masked man. Karla's heart raced once more as she saw him standing across from her. For a moment, time seemed to freeze again. He entered the room in a sharp black suit, exuding confidence. "Good morning, everyone," he said, his deep tone stirring Karla's emotions anew. Her eyes searched for the face behind the mask she'd seen the night before. But he turned to her with purpose, locking gazes. And then, unexpectedly, she learned he was the CEO. His name was Alexander Blackwell. All Karla could think was that he was the masked man from the night before. But this wasn't just any man. He was the owner and CEO of the company. Suddenly, she didn't know what to do. In the span of one night, she'd gone from being an ordinary woman dancing with him to facing one of the most powerful figures in the business world. Everything had changed. Karla spent the day trying to push aside her swirling emotions. In the corner of the room, a few hours had passed since the morning meeting. Alexander Blackwell had spoken in front of everyone with the ease of a natural leader. But for Karla, everything felt surreal. She was now face to face with the man from last night. He'd revealed his identity, yet the mystery trailing him still occupied her mind. When the meeting ended, everyone left the room. Karla stood to return to her desk, but at that moment, Alexander's voice stopped her. "Karla, a moment." Her heart skipped a beat. Hearing her name from a CEO's lips seemed to carry a different weight. She turned to him, her face composed in a professional expression. "Yes, Mr. Blackwell?" she said, her voice trembling slightly. Alexander, ensuring they were alone, stepped closer with his characteristic confidence. "Don't forget last night's dance," he whispered. "But don't forget what's between us either." Karla's stomach tightened. In that instant, she realized none of this was a coincidence. The masked man from last night couldn't be this man. And now, The thought of merging these two worlds both drew her in and unnerved her. Alexander gazed into her eyes for a moment before saying, "Just business." Then he added, "But sometimes going beyond business can be hard." Hundreds of questions hovered on the tip of Karla's tongue, but she managed to silence them. "I understand," she said simply. After the meeting, days began to pass quickly. Karla worked hard to adjust to her new job, but with each day, her curiosity about Alexander grew. No matter how much she tried to keep her distance, every moment and every gesture reminded her of him. One evening, after work, Alexander's assistant relayed a message to her. "Mr. Blackwell would like a private meeting with you. Please return to the office at 8 p.m. Caught between surprise and excitement, Karla agreed. She quickly wrapped up her tasks and returned to the office that evening. Though she knew it would likely be professional, a flicker of hope had ignited within her. The dance from that night still played in her mind, and somehow, she sensed things were about to deepen. When she stepped through the office door, she found Alexander waiting in the dim light. Only the glow of a desk lamp illuminated his face. Being alone with him carried an odd allure that Karla couldn't ignore. "Come sit," he said, guiding her with his eyes from across the room. As Karla approached, she noticed the seriousness in Alexander's gaze softening slightly. Yet the distance between them still lingered. "What did you want to talk about?" she asked, a little hesitant. Alexander took a deep breath. "About our working relationship," he said. "But there's more to it than that." There was a strange meaning in his eyes. Karla began to feel unsettled again by the uncertainty within her and this man's enigmatic demeanor. "What's going on?" she asked. Alexander took a step closer. "Karla," he said, emphasizing her name lightly. "We've started to get to know each other better. I want you to understand me. And I have a proposition for you." Unable to guess what he might say, Karla fell silent for a moment. Alexander took a sip of coffee, then looked into her eyes. "Don't forget last night, but from now on, our working relationship will get much more complicated," he said. Karla couldn't fully grasp what his words meant. "Why?" she asked, stepping back slightly. After a brief pause, Alexander met her gaze. "Because I want to share more with you," he said. "This isn't just about work, Karla. It's something deeper." With every word adding to her inner turmoil, Karla stepped closer to him. "What do you mean?" she asked. In that moment, the pull in Alexander's eyes drew her in against her will. She took another step toward him, realizing she wanted to share this moment with him. But she also sensed how dangerous it could be. After Alexander's words, a deep silence settled over the room. Karla stared into his eyes so intensely that she seemed to be trying to decipher every word, every movement. But there was something there. She could sense a fragility in the eyes of this powerful, intelligent, and enigmatic man. It surprised her. Normally, people in leadership roles concealed their emotional weaknesses. Yet with Alexander, there was something that felt like an unapproachable barrier. As he watched her, Alexander seemed almost unsure of what to do. Spending so much time alone with her was throwing him off balance. He felt that taking a single step could change everything. Karla broke the silence. "I feel like I'm being pulled toward something," she said. Her words hung in the air, encapsulating the turmoil within her. She wanted to get closer to him, yet she knew she should stay away. Alexander stood still for a moment, his gaze unwavering, then spoke after a deep breath. "Karla, we should try to keep our distance. Because this situation could put both you and me at risk." His voice carried a defensive edge, sharp and resolute, making Karla think that barrier might be impossible to breach. But there was something about that distance that drew her in even more. She couldn't help feeling the pull inside her. In that moment, she saw in Alexander's eyes a closeness neither of them wanted to admit. "You feel it too, don't you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Despite all this distance, there's something." Alexander frowned and stepped closer. "I don't feel it, Karla. I just want us to do our jobs properly. Our relationship should stay within the bounds of professionalism. That's it." But Karla realized she couldn't escape the intense emotions stirring within her. "Do you really believe that?" she said, taking another step toward him. "Can a person truly run from everything? When we danced, we connected so deeply. How could we forget that?" Alexander's eyes darkened, as if something inside him was crumbling. He tried to hide his emotional conflict, but now it was all laid bare. That night's dance, everything with the masked man. It had been so profound that it left a void in Karla's heart. And that void grew larger with each passing day. Feeling the intensity of her emotional storm, Karla paused for a few seconds. Then, taking a deep breath, she said, "What happens now, Mr. Blackwell? What should we do?" Alexander turned his head and the window as he spoke. "We can't do this. There are boundaries to this job, and we can't cross them." Yet the uncertainty in his voice only made his indecision more apparent. Karla questioned his stance. Her interest in Alexander was growing, but that same pull also felt like an obstacle. Getting closer to him was like stepping into a dark journey. Still, the impact of that night's dance had marked the beginning of it all. "For me, work isn't everything," she said slowly. "Some things can go beyond work, can't they?" Alexander shot her a brief glance and fell silent. After a while, he said, "We'll figure it out with time. But this could confuse you even more. This journey might be very dangerous." Karla nodded uncertainly, but in that moment, she felt nothing could stop her. The emptiness inside her was filled only by Alexander's presence. That moment when she felt she belonged to him was so close that nothing else seemed to matter. As the night grew late, Karla left the room. There was a restlessness in her heart, but at the same time, it was brimming with a desire to spend more time with Alexander. This complexity deepened with every passing day. When Karla left the office after Alexander's words, her mind was a mess. On one side was his distance. On the other, the powerful desire within her. The truth was, her relationship with Alexander grew more complicated with each passing day. Getting closer to him was as alluring as it was terrifying. Yet beyond all this, there was something more. That magical night they'd shared. The masked man, the one she'd danced with, it was where everything had begun. That man, that night, had swept her into another world. For a week, things went as expected at work. Alexander remained his usual self, professional, distant, and charismatic. Karla tried to stay close to him, but he put up a barrier every time. It was as if he was trying to keep her from seeing him, as though every look and every word might lead to more confusion. Still, Karla felt drawn to him. The pull between them only intensified with each day. One morning, while working in the office, her assistant handed her a message. "Mr. Blackwell wants to meet with you. Come to the office at 7 p.m. Karla grabbed her phone and read the note, her curiosity spiking. Alexander requesting a meeting so formally made her almost impatient to return to the office. At 7 p.m., she arrived and found Alexander at his desk in that dimly lit room once again. His face bore an expression different from the days before. Something had shifted. Karla stepped inside, easing the door open. "Good evening," he said, his tone as cool and professional as ever. "Good evening, Karla," Alexander replied, his eyes fixed on her. But this time, something was off. An uncertainty seeped through his words and gaze. "Why did you call me here?" Karla asked, observing him more closely. Alexander took a deep breath and set the documents in his hand onto the desk. "I've been thinking over the past few days, and I decided we need to talk," he said. "It's hard to hide this, Karla. This attraction between us could affect our work somehow. I don't want it to get this complicated." Karla froze at his words. She couldn't stop thinking about the emotions swirling inside her. "Your work?" she asked. "What about us? Are you only talking about the job?" Alexander's eyes darkened for a brief moment. "You need to understand this," he said. "Our relationship could be dangerous in every way. If we let it deepen any further, everything could spiral out of control." Karla took a step forward. "But don't you feel how out of control it already is?" she said. "You feel it too. There's more than just work between us." For a fleeting moment, Alexander's gaze softened. There was a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes, but he quickly regained his cold demeanor. "We can't do this, Karla. Neither of us can handle it," he said firmly. As Karla wrestled with the emotional storm inside her, she edged closer to him. "But we're human too, Alexander. Running from this distance is just fooling ourselves. How do we forget that night? We got to know each other, we touched each other. We can't step back now." Alexander stood abruptly, trying to mask the tension within him. "I can't handle this, Karla," he said, the fragility in his voice now more apparent. "No matter how much you want it, this journey has to end." Karla took another step toward him. "You don't have to accept that," she said. "We can choose each other. We don't have to be afraid." But Alexander took a deep breath, averted his eyes, and bowed his head. "Karla, I can't do this. We need to focus on our work. Nothing else can happen." Karla watched him and slowly stepped back. Anger, disappointment, and an intense pull battled within her. Yet she also knew he was right. Letting things get this complicated in the business world could truly make life harder for both of them. "If you want to keep your distance from now on, I'll accept that," she said slowly. "But don't forget this. No matter how much distance you put between us, we're connected. Everything has consequences." As Karla left the office, she felt an emptiness in her heart. She knew Alexander's words highlighted just how challenging and complicated everything was. Yet the emotions inside her wouldn't settle. They grew stronger with each passing day. Getting closer to him, touching him, knowing how dangerous it could be, stirred fear within her. On one hand, she longed to feel him. On the other, she knew she had to maintain that distance. The balance between them grew more fragile every day. At night, lying in her room bathed in the blue glow of light, she wanted to change something, to steer everything in a different direction. But every move, every hesitation, only pulled her deeper into a void. She thought back to her first encounter with Alexander, their dance. The man behind the mask had been the embodiment of her dreams, the one she'd chased after with her desires. But as things turned professional, the gap between that man and this one widened. Now, grappling with these deepening emotions was both enticing and terrifying. A week later, she endured another tough day at the office. But her mind was consumed by Alexander alone. Somehow, she wanted to confront him again, to decide what to do about their relationship. Slowly, she made up her mind. She would get closer to him, but with a step back to keep it under control. No matter how complicated it became, she had to follow her feelings. That evening, she decided to meet him in his office. Her heart held both hope and fear. On the top floor of the company building, where everything still glowed under the lights, she found Alexander standing alone. Karla entered without knocking. Alexander glanced at her, but not with his usual coldness. His eyes seemed to say something, though no words came out. "Karla," he said, his voice tinged with weariness. "When will you let me go?" Karla took another step toward him. "Let you go? If we're going to live our lives with this much distance, then why are we even here?" she said, looking into his eyes. "You don't understand me, do you? All this tension, all this distance, it's meaningless. There's something between us, and we have to face it." Alexander stepped back and bowed his head. "We do have to face it, yes. But I need to protect you, Karla. You have to understand that. In this world, emotions don't do us any good. It's just work, only work." Karla closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "I'm trying to understand you, but you're the one stopping me from doing that." Another silence fell. Karla felt that breaking this distance required her to take a step forward. She couldn't resist the rising emotions within her. She moved closer and this time placed her hands on his back. "We need to do this, Alexander. To see and feel each other, it shouldn't be this hard." Alexander felt as though he'd been trapped behind a rigid wall. But there was a crack in his eyes. He could no longer defend himself. The insecurities, the fears, and the sharp barriers of the business world crumbled in an instant. He simply took Karla's hands and pulled her toward him. For the first time, the distance between them shrank so much that they were truly close. Karla could feel every movement of his body. As they sensed each other's warmth, time seemed to stand still. The emotional conflict in their eyes mirrored the tangle of feelings they both carried. Words caught in their throats. No language could capture that moment. As Alexander looked into Karla's eyes, he knew he could no longer turn his back on her. He felt the battle within him one last time and then, despite his reluctance, took a step closer and leaned toward her lips. Their first kiss began hesitantly, slowly, but then everything shifted rapidly. All the distance, all the walls between them vanished in an instant. There was only their emotion-filled moment, the union of two people surrendering completely to each other. The relationship between Karla and Alexander transformed entirely after that first kiss. Neither the business world nor the distances could stand in the way of their bond anymore. But they both knew that everything carried a deeper meaning. In that moment, It dawned on them that this was a journey, that life was a complex and profound sea. When Karla went to the office each morning, she felt that everything had shifted to another dimension. Her relationship with Alexander was no longer just about work. Every moment spent with him became a mix of passion, conflict, and resolution. Their connection held love on one side, but it also carried fears, misunderstandings, and insecurities on the other. Alexander wrestled with an intensifying inner battle each day. No matter how much he tried to keep her at a distance, he couldn't stop thinking about Karla. The shadows of his past still lingered, traumas and losses from the business world. Yet, no matter how close Karla got, she offered him a kind of healing, a sense of peace. Even so, the powerful pull between them and the emotional turmoil that needed unraveling were far from easy. One morning, when he arrived at the office, Alexander treated her with far more coldness than usual. In front of everyone, he embodied that strong, charismatic leader persona. When Karla entered his office as she always did, she gave him a sidelong smile. But that smile didn't receive the response she'd hoped for from Alexander. The chaos within him was weighing on him more heavily now. Throughout that day, Alexander's distant demeanor heightened the tension inside Karla. Thinking back to the night when everything had felt resolved between them, she now found herself in a completely different world. After those magical moments with Alexander, seeing the mysterious, detached leader behind the man now pushed Karla into a sense of loneliness. As evening fell, Karla could no longer bear ignoring Alexander. She turned toward his office, unable to suppress the emotional storm raging inside her. His distant gaze, his cold demeanor, and the tension that had been growing between them for weeks made her feel like everything was spiraling into a dead end. She knocked on the door and stepped inside. Alexander was sitting at his desk, lost in deep thought, his eyes staring off into the distance. Karla took a step forward, gathering her courage, and approached him. "What's going on, Alexander?" she asked, her voice slightly trembling. "What happened to you? Why are you so cold?" Alexander heard her voice and turned his eyes toward her, but he remained silent. Karla felt her heartbeat quicken as she took another step closer. "We can't go on like this. Everything between us should be clear. Nothing can be resolved with this distance and these walls between us." Alexander took a deep breath and lifted his gaze from the desk to meet hers. "I don't want this, Karla. I can't do this." His words were so firm that Karla felt as though she hadn't expressed her emotions properly. She wanted to explain the storm within her in a single sentence, but she couldn't find the right words. "Are you running away again?" she asked, her eyes filled with sadness. "No matter how much you run, the bond between us won't break. You have to understand that, Alexander. We can't be indifferent to each other. We're already lost." Alexander met her gaze deeply before speaking in a slow, measured tone. "I want to be close to you, Karla. But the truth is, in the world of business, there's no place for this. Everything has to be under control. Something this emotional, it could put us in a difficult position." Karla fought back the tears welling in her eyes. "Then keeping everything under control means losing you. Some things can't be controlled. There is something between us, Alexander. Don't deny it." Something in Alexander's eyes cracked for a brief moment as he listened to her words. But he quickly pulled himself together and said, "I'm doing this for both of us, Karla. I'm doing this to protect you. For your own good." Karla didn't look away. "Protect me. No one can decide what's good for me, Alexander. I'm ready to take this journey with you, but you just have to give it a chance." Alexander listened carefully to her words, then took a step back and turned silently toward the window. Inside, a storm was raging, deeper than he could express. But one thing was clear: being close to Karla, feeling this intensely, made it impossible to walk away. After some time, the silence between Alexander and Karla was replaced by a decision. They realized that taking bold steps was necessary to bring clarity to everything. Balancing the demands of the business world with their personal lives would be challenging, but the deep connection they shared compelled them to embark on this journey together. Karla had no regrets about giving Alexander a chance, but she knew that this journey would mark a new beginning for both of them. They had to figure out how to navigate both the attraction they felt for each other and the distance they sometimes needed. However, one thing was certain: as long as they were together, they had to believe that everything would fall into place. There was now a kind of silent agreement between Karla and Alexander. More than anything in the business world, they had to decide how to navigate their relationship. Karla tried to cherish every moment she had with Alexander. Every day in the office, she worked to break through his cold and distant demeanor, deepening their connection little by little. Yet, something always felt incomplete. In such a complex world, she often felt like she was falling behind her own emotions. As the days passed, she noticed small changes in Alexander's behavior. At first, he had seen Karla as nothing more than a colleague, but now, she had become an important part of his life. Still, he struggled to accept his feelings. His confidence and charisma in the business world made it difficult for him to form emotional connections. He always felt the need to be a strong leader. This burden was wearing him down and increasing the emotional distance between them. One evening, they were alone in Alexander's office once again. Karla had made up her mind to talk to him. She thought it was finally time to bring clarity to everything. They needed to talk about where this relationship was going and what the future held for them. But as always, Alexander avoided the conversation. The turmoil inside him was evident on his face. "Karla, why do you insist on making everything more difficult?" he asked, his voice carrying a trace of vulnerability. Karla stepped closer and replied gently, "I don't want to make things harder, Alexander. But we are connected. Running away like this, keeping this distance, it's impossible." "Impossible?" Alexander turned to her with a deep sigh. "We have to be realistic. The bond between us could put both of us at risk. One mistake in the business world could cost me everything. I need you to understand that." Karla held his gaze firmly. "Yes, I understand. But we've already touched each other's lives. We've felt something real. It's not that easy to take it back, Alexander," she said. "What's happening to us? Which direction are we supposed to take?" For a moment, Alexander felt as if time had stopped. The internal battle raging inside him was so intense that he searched for answers in Karla's eyes. But instead of responding, he simply closed his eyes for a brief second. "It's just business," he finally said in a low voice. "Nothing more." Karla let out a deep breath and took a step back. "How do you feel every time you say that, Alexander?" she asked. "Is it really just business? Then why are you so drawn to this? Why do you have to be so rigid?" Alexander remained silent, staring out the window. "I have to do this, Karla. It's just business." Karla moved closer, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. "No, Alexander. There's something more. Being with you, it's not just business. Accept that, and let's figure this out together. Let me truly understand you." For a long moment, they remained silent. Karla could feel the intensity of Alexander's emotions more than ever. He was strong, determined, and yet there was something undeniably vulnerable about him. Being close to him was both intoxicating and terrifying. But they both knew they couldn't keep running from this. Everything was already intertwined. The next day, the office was in chaos. While Karla tried to focus on her work, her mind kept replaying last night's conversation with Alexander. She was occupied with thoughts of what she should say to him and how they could find a solution. They were undeniably connected, yet both were aware of how dangerous this bond could be. Their professional and emotional worlds were colliding. As the hours passed, Alexander's assistant approached Karla and handed her a file. "This file needs the CEO's signature," she said. Karla took the file, feeling the tension rise within her. Being close to Alexander, pushing the boundaries between work and personal life, was becoming increasingly challenging. When she entered his office, Alexander was once again working alone in the dim light. Karla placed the file on his desk, watching him carefully. "You need to sign this," she said, her voice slightly trembling. But at that moment, she saw the same cold expression in Alexander's eyes. His decision to keep a distance between business and emotions was dragging him into an even deeper internal conflict. "I have to sign it, Karla," Alexander said, his eyes locking onto hers. "But will you bring it to a level we can accept?" Karla looked at him for a moment. She knew exactly how difficult that question was. She didn't want things to become even more complicated, yet deep inside, she felt that complexity was necessary. "Yes, Alexander. Things becoming more complicated is actually a beginning," she said. "We have to find a way together." And in that moment, on the fine line between business and emotions, as they stepped closer to each other, they took the first step into the true journey of their lives. Karla and Alexander had no choice but to accept the distance between them. Their relationship required a balance that merged both worlds, the business world and their personal lives. No matter how challenging and complicated things became, the undeniable attraction between them provided the strength they needed to keep moving forward. As they grew closer, both of them learned to set aside their insecurities and fears. Yet, they knew that this was still an unfinished journey. Their relationship was becoming a story where everything converged, moving toward a delicate and complex balance. Karla and Alexander were no longer just colleagues. Over time, their relationship had turned into a kind of dependency. The closer they wanted to get, the more they pushed the distance between them. At a glance, their relationship seemed like a dead-end road, yet the bond between them was the only force guiding them. Every moment, every decision, every touch was deeper, and that depth both frightened them and drew them closer. For a week, the daily routine at the office had become more challenging for Karla. Alexander had reverted to his cold demeanor. He wanted to reach out to her, to be close, but at the same time, he prioritized his leadership persona in the business world. Maintaining a balance between these two worlds was becoming nearly impossible. His moments of coldness and distance made Karla's heart ache. Their relationship was stuck in limbo. They couldn't fully separate, nor could they completely come together. One evening, when they were alone in the office, Karla walked toward Alexander's office. She knocked on the door and heard his voice from inside. "Come in." As she entered, she saw him at his desk, eyes on his computer, lost in thought in the dimly lit room. Seeing such a strong man consumed by solitude in the silence of the office unsettled Karla. "What's going on, Alexander?" she asked, her tone softer than it had been in previous days. "You're keeping me at a distance, shutting me out. There has to be a reason." Alexander remained silent for a few seconds, staring at his desk. "There is a reason, Karla," he finally said in a low voice. "You can't push me any further. We both know where this is heading. This might be where everything ends." Karla took a step closer. "Where is it heading?" she asked, her eyes darkening. "Do you really believe that?" "We are connected, Alexander. How can you deny that? We both feel something. This is more than just business. You have to accept it." "For me, business comes before everything," Alexander said, shrugging his shoulders. "Making this complicated, it puts both of us at risk. I have to stand as a leader in front of everyone. Our personal lives can't interfere with that." For a moment, Karla felt helpless. No matter how close she was to him, she struggled to express her emotions. "We have to make a choice," she said. "Either we lose each other, or we give in to this completely. We don't have to make it so complicated. We need to be truly close to each other." After some time, even though they had left the office, Karla and Alexander's relationship had only grown more complicated. Karla acknowledged that Alexander's behavior remained distant and cold, yet neither of them could let go of each other. There was an overwhelming pressure to define their place in each other's lives. Their roles and professionalism at work had consumed them, but the complexity of their relationship was becoming more apparent with each passing moment. A week later, at a corporate event, Karla and Alexander were forced to come together. The event was a large gathering, and as they looked into each other's eyes, they tried to maintain their professional demeanor. However, the tension and storm within them were evident in their gazes. During the event, when Karla found herself alone for a moment, she approached Alexander and said, "We can't keep doing this, Alexander. Do we all have to be this lonely? This distance is enough. I don't want to be alone anymore." Alexander noticed the pain in her voice and turned to face her. "We have to do this, Karla. This is a burden for me," he said. "I have to stand as a leader in front of everyone. There's no place for something this complicated in the business world." Karla gave him a deep look, her eyes welling up with emotion. "It shouldn't be this hard, Alexander. We have to find a way. We have to carry this weight together. But we have to do it together." And in that moment, amidst everyone, even though no one else could see it, Karla and Alexander shared a meaning so profound that a glimmer of hope emerged. A belief that somehow there would be a solution. No matter how difficult their relationship was, their bond would help them overcome anything. Bolam 14, Kara Ani. The next morning, when Karla and Alexander arrived at the office, the tension between them was still high. But this time, they had both made a different decision. They were determined to come together. Neither of them wanted to lose each other any further, whether in the business world or in their personal lives. That morning, Karla approached Alexander and said, "I'm giving you a chance, Alexander. We have to take this journey together. We have to do this. It's not just business. Our lives are connected." This time, Alexander looked at her with a newfound change in his eyes and replied, "Yes, we should take this journey together, Karla. But it won't be easy. It will still be challenging, but I want to give this a chance." They exchanged a deep look, and once again, they took the first step toward a significant change in their lives. When Karla and Alexander finally decided to embark on this journey together, their relationship had reached a turning point. What initially seemed like just a professional connection had gradually evolved into something much deeper. There were still questions about how they would navigate both the business world and their personal relationship, but the trust they had in each other gave them the courage to take the next step. At first, they thought it would be easy, seeing each other, sharing moments that belonged only to them, bridging the distance imposed by their work. However, things would not go as smoothly as they had hoped. The pressures of their company, the watchful eyes of the outside world, and their own internal struggles would test them in ways they hadn't anticipated. One evening, as the office was closing, Karla and Alexander continued working together. Karla was deeply engrossed in analyzing reports at her desk, while Alexander assisted her. At first, the quiet atmosphere in the office made them realize how well they worked together. But something was growing inside them. This constant blending of work and emotions was making everything more complicated. At one point, Karla set down the file and turned to Alexander. "We can't keep doing this," she said with determination in her eyes. "Mixing our work and personal lives this much is overwhelming. But at the same time, I don't want to lose you, Alexander." Alexander turned to her, his eyes reflecting a deep internal conflict. "Things have become really complicated for me, Karla," he admitted. "Working together, trying to understand each other, but having our relationship entangled with work makes everything harder." "Yes, it's hard," Karla agreed, taking a step closer. "But being together is also incredibly valuable. Instead of keeping our distance and losing each other, we should face this head-on." Alexander took a deep breath and leaned against his desk. "I need to accept this," he said. "Despite all my fears, being with you means more." Karla smiled. "Yes, and no matter what happens, we have to do this together. Whatever challenges come our way, we'll face them side by side." They exchanged a deep look, and in that moment, they both felt that things were finally beginning to fall into place. Through every challenge, they had a chance to grow together. The relationship between Karla and Alexander had become far more complicated than they had initially expected. The challenges they faced in both their professional and personal lives tested them more with each passing day. The intense competition within the company was taking a toll on both of them. However, the trust they had in each other and the bond they shared stood above everything else. One morning, Karla arrived at the office to attend an important meeting with Alexander. During the meeting, she realized that things were becoming increasingly complex. Alexander was faced with making critical decisions about the company's future, and this deeply affected Karla as well. Being so involved in his world was beginning to strain their emotional connection. After the meeting, Karla approached Alexander and said, "It hurts me to see you struggling like this. But no matter what, we'll get through this together, won't we? If you're feeling trapped, we should face it together." Alexander gave her a brief look. "Yes," he said, "but this will affect you too. If we intertwine our lives this much, we'll both have to pay the price." With determination and trust in her eyes, Karla responded, "Maybe, but we'll pay it together. And in the end, it will be worth it." As time went on, Karla and Alexander began to better understand the boundaries in their relationship. Despite the pressures of their inner conflicts and the business world, one thing was certain. Maintaining this relationship was only possible through the trust they had in each other. But this trust was starting to put them under strain. One day, Alexander decided to take Karla out for dinner. It was time to step away from everything and emotionally relax, to breathe for a moment. When they arrived at the restaurant, Alexander sat at the table and took a deep breath. "I need to say something, Karla," he said, with seriousness in his voice. "The business world is starting to wear you down. Maintaining such a deep relationship is really challenging. Is this the right choice for you?" Karla looked at him and said, "Yes, it's challenging. But in the end, I want to be with you. I accept this relationship. We can make it work." After looking at her for a moment, Alexander said, "Then we won't just see this relationship as business. Business will stay in business. But we'll be here for each other. It's worth paying the price." That evening, Alexander and Karla took a new step toward building a future together, embracing the challenges in both their professional and personal lives. As Karla and Alexander strengthened their bond and trust in each other, they began managing the chaos of the business world with greater ease. By accepting each other's strengths and weaknesses, they found balance in their relationship. Now, every challenge seemed like an opportunity to make them stronger. Together, they had a solid connection that allowed them to overcome anything, both in the business world and in their personal lives. And eventually, Karla and Alexander took a step toward building a great future together. Both of them left behind their past fears and inner conflicts, moving forward with the love they had for each other. Recently, Karla and Alexander had reinforced their trust in each other. The time they spent together had deepened their relationship. However, despite how close their lives had become, there were still many obstacles and challenges. The pressures within the company, external criticism, and the emotional boundaries they shared were growing increasingly difficult to navigate. One day, after a long meeting at the office, Karla and Alexander were left alone. As Karla tidied up her work as usual, Alexander watched her silently for a moment. There was uncertainty in his eyes. "Something is changing, Karla," Alexander said, taking a deep breath. "The more complicated things get in the business world, the more I feel like we're going to challenge each other. Being this close, mixing emotions into it, everything has a cost." Karla turned to face him. "I know that, Alexander," she said. "But we need to overcome these obstacles by trusting each other. Our relationship isn't just about work. We need to understand how we both feel. We will succeed together." Alexander nodded, looking at her. "But what if we lose?" he said, uncertainty in his voice. "What if being this close actually puts us in danger?" Karla took another step forward. "We need to try, because every challenge will make us stronger. But we must believe in each other. We can overcome everything. We can balance both work and our personal lives," she said with determination. Alexander looked into Karla's eyes. "Yes, we must believe in each other," he said. "But this won't be easy." As they left the room, the trust and commitment they had for each other were strong enough to overcome anything. But they both knew that the real challenges had yet to begin. The next day, an important decision was going to be made in the company's board meeting. Karla knew that this decision would shape the future of the company. Alexander, as always, was used to stepping forward as a leader, but this time, things were different. Karla and Alexander's relationship was under the spotlight for everyone to see. Still, neither of them was willing to back down from the love and trust they had for each other. During the meeting, Alexander's leadership style sparked debates again. Many executives found some of his decisions harsh, and they directed their reactions at Karla as well. Karla had to adjust to the tense atmosphere of the meeting. In a moment when everyone's eyes were on them, she was trying to maintain the trust she had in Alexander. When the meeting ended, Alexander was sitting alone in his office. Karla knocked on his door and entered. "How did you feel about it?" she asked. Alexander looked up at her. "It was challenging. But we are both here, fighting this battle together," he said. "Sometimes we need to put a little distance, Karla. The closer we get, the more we put ourselves in danger." Karla approached him. "I can't explain it to you, but I want to understand you. The bond between us isn't just about work. We both know that, don't we?" she said. "These challenges will only bring us closer, not drive us apart." Alexander paused for a moment, not breaking eye contact. Then he said, "Yes, maybe you're right. Together, we are strong, that's true." As time passed, Karla and Alexander managed to find balance in their relationship. By overcoming the challenges within the company together, they strengthened the trust they had in each other. However, they knew that the business world was an ever-changing dynamic. Many times, their closeness would be tested by the harsh rules of the corporate world and the competitive environment. One day, while working together on another major company project, Karla and Alexander found themselves facing a critical decision. A major decision regarding the project was a turning point for the future of the company. This decision would not only affect their professional lives, but also deeply impact their relationship. Both of them trusted each other's opinions, instincts, and inner strength. This decision is important not just for work, but for us as well, Alexander said. It's to prove that we are strong together and can overcome any challenge. Karla, with confidence in him, replied, "Yes, we will do this together. And in the end, this decision will bring a significant change, not just professionally, but in our personal lives as well." This decision would strengthen the bond that kept them together, and the steps they would take together would mark a significant turning point, not only in the business world but in their lives. Despite facing great challenges at every stage of their relationship, Karla and Alexander ultimately maintained their commitment and trust in each other, no matter what. Each passing day, the love they shared in both their professional and personal lives made them even stronger. Every obstacle in their relationship helped them grow and build a stronger foundation. In the face of all future challenges, Karla and Alexander learned how important it was to be together, to trust each other, and to build a path together. In the future, they would face the greatest struggles and greatest victories of the business world side by side. And at that time, the bond between them would be the strongest not only in the business world, but in every aspect of life. Karla and Alexander now felt that everything in their lives was tightening together. They had begun overcoming the struggles within the company and the pressures from the outside world more easily. However, from time to time, they tested the boundaries of their relationship and strengthened their mutual trust. No matter how challenging it was, their bond grew stronger every day. One day, Karla was preparing a major presentation with Alexander. They were about to sign a crucial agreement for a project that would affect the future of the company. As they worked on the presentation, they began to grow closer in their professional world. They had concerns about how things would unfold, but their trust in each other allowed them to overcome everything. Before the presentation, Karla called Alexander into her office and said, "Today, everything could change," taking a sip of coffee. "I know this will be a big step for us, not just for work. But when I'm with you, I feel like we can handle anything." Alexander took a deep breath and replied, "Yes, this will be a big step for us, Karla. But as long as we're together, nothing can stop us," reassuring her. During the presentation, everything went perfectly. The project was a significant turning point for the future of the company, and with the decisions they made together, Alexander and Karla would succeed. Everyone appreciated Karla and Alexander's leadership and their vision in the business world. While enjoying the success they had achieved, their commitment to each other had only grown stronger. Over time, everything in the business world began to fall into place. Karla and Alexander had learned a lot during this journey they took together. Every challenge, every obstacle brought them closer and pushed their relationship one step further. However, the greatest challenge had always been the fears, anxieties, and lack of trust they carried within themselves. But now they were strong enough to overcome these. One morning, as Karla and Alexander were having their coffee together, they shared their dreams for the future. "From now on, everything will be easier," said Alexander with a smile. "We know we can do everything together. But remember, I don't want to lose you, Karla. I'll do the best of everything with you." Karla, locking her gaze on Alexander, said, "I know that. We've grown together, we've developed together. No matter what, we can get through anything, both in our professional and personal lives." As they moved forward, leaving all the challenges behind and progressing with love and trust between them, they felt that everything was perfect. Now, every challenge they faced was an opportunity that would take them one step further. The love and trust they shared gave them the strength to overcome everything. A year later, Karla and Alexander had achieved great success in the business world. Under their leadership, the company showed significant growth, and everything had turned out even better than they had imagined. But most importantly, the bond and trust they shared made them stronger than ever. One day, while Karla and Alexander were celebrating in the company's new office, Alexander called Karla to his side for a moment. There was deep love in his eyes as he stepped toward her. "The time we've spent together has made everything more meaningful," Alexander said, looking at Karla. "Despite all the struggles, I don't want to lose you. We belong to each other." Karla looked at him with emotional intensity in her eyes. "Yes, everything became more beautiful with you," she said. "Being with you was the best decision of my life." Alexander embraced Karla and smiled. "Then we will always have each other, right?" In that moment, with the love and trust they shared, they decided to leave all the obstacles in the business world behind and begin a new chapter together. In the end, their love and successes held them together, and they set out to spend the rest of their lives united, hand in hand.